Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our second March webinar this month. We are excited to have Dr. Elaine Ng and Mike Morrison focusing specifically on how to prepare your poster for IPSSW 2020 specifically, but a more broad, just helpful guide as you put together your research for your posters. Mike and Elaine are going to be reviewing various strategies to design these posters and how to properly present your research in the most efficient way. We have Mike, who has more of our creative background, and Elaine from a more scientific perspective, so I'm excited to hear both sides. The session will conclude with an open Q&A portion, and you can enter your questions in the control panel of the GoToWebinar platform. You can do that throughout the webinar, but also specifically at the end after both presenters have finished. You are in listen-only mode, so unfortunately you're not able to ask questions live throughout the webinar, but like I said, in that Q&A box, you'll be able to put that in at any point throughout the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we have Dr. Elaine Ng and Mike Morrison here, and Dr. Ng is a pediatric anesthesiologist at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto and is our lovely co-chair of the IPSS Education Committee. And we also have our guest speaker here, who is Mike Morrison, and is a former UX designer who quit his tech career to become a PhD student in work psychology. He says he's trying to do two things in his career: bring user experience design principles to science to help disseminate knowledge faster and more efficiently, and understand the psychological differences between so-called realists and dreamers. He recently released a video introducing a new way to design scientific research posters, which every field in science uses and are notorious for their bad design. The video went viral, and now scientists across the field and science are trying to understand and trying out his new design and having more fun sharing their research with other scientists. So we're really excited to have both of them here to review their different ways that they put these posters together. So Elaine, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. So just my portion should be relatively short, and just to talk about how you create a poster the traditional way, and then I'm sure Mike will have a field day taking mine apart later. So no disclosures, and the objective is to describe the key components of a scientific poster and how to create a scientific poster to the best of my ability. So we talk a little bit about size and orientation, layout adjustment, font and size, and I guess I feel good about talking about it because every single poster, well, pretty much, that we see, mine looks like theirs, but of course that's why we have Mike here. So the key components, likely the same as in your abstract that was submitted to the conference, because that was your guidelines. Title, names and affiliation, introduction, objectives, methods, results. And sometimes I just lump the discussion and conclusions together because it's not a long drawn out section, and there's not that much to say, so I just kind of lump it together. Some people like to add references. I've noticed recently I don't have too many references to put down. In fact, I wouldn't put down like 20 that went into the project. And maybe in your introduction, you reference to something, you may have one or two. Acknowledgements, I don't tend to do that either, or you can do that at the end, kind of small. It could be your perioperative care unit, or it can be your medical school class of 2020 for the contribution to something, because it takes away from the clutter, or it adds clutter. So to kind of be careful with that. So logistics, is it going to be a paper poster presentation or electronic? At IPSSW is paper, but even if it's not electronic, you still have to do it the same way. Is it landscape or portrait? And I find a lot of North American ones are landscape, European ones are portrait. And it's good to know what the size of the display board is. Then you know what size you should print your thing. It's nice if it fits as opposed to need to borrow space from someone else. And then the other thing I learned with time is sometimes you may have a printing company in mind, or your colleagues tell you to go to that cheap place or whatever place it is. Sometimes the cost and size may determine what you're going to do. So the place I go to is pretty cheap, but then they go by feet, so 4 by 3 is what I usually go by. But so why would I make it 4 times 3.5 or 4 times 3 and a bit? Why would I pay for that bit unless I really want it? And sometimes they say if it's too small, they will add extra costs, and so why would I do that either? And they also said, my company also said, if it's a dark background, like black or something, it'll cost a lot more. Turnaround time, so of course money talks. And so at the place I go to, they can do overnight or same day if you submit by 9 o'clock in the morning. But again, it's all money, and you have to think about, okay, I just get my act together and do what I want to do. Here we go. So how to start? I think one of the ways is to copy and paste sections from the abstract and then adjust. And then you would notice that it's very wordy if you do it that way. Some people like to rewrite all what goes into each section, but I think probably kind of copy and paste and then adjust. Be concise. Think about what it is you want to say, and maybe you don't do complete sentences and bullets. And I think those who like complete sentences have a very hard time with this. But you want to get to the point, so and you're wasting space too. And consider diagrams for your results as opposed to just words if you can. Size and font, this is just a general guide. If you Google size and font for posters, there are all kinds of ideas, but in general around that kind of size, and you have to adjust. Anything smaller than 30 point for the text is not good. And I've looked at my past posters, they were like anywhere between 30, 36, and they had displayed well in my mind. Like if people could see it from 3 feet apart away, that's what they say. So use a clean font like Arial or Calibri. Times New Roman for me, not that great, which is what the second one is. And the whole page of this Comic Sans, which kind of looks good. It's not great for a scientific poster everywhere. So you have to think about the layout. Is it left? Are you making people read left to right, top to bottom, or a mix? So it needs to be kind of logical. Align left with the text as opposed to adjust to the whole bubble. And you should put a legend with every figure. So figure 1, comparison between group A and group B regarding, like, I don't know, competency in intubation, something like that. As I said, easily read from a distance of 3 feet away. And when you're done, do a spell check and save as a PDF. And so you can actually see what it looks like, enlarge and not. And because you spend so much time aligning it, you want to get it right. Because once you print it, you want to reprint it. Again, that's time and money. So here are just 3 posters from the past that I kind of collected, and I thought this one looks nice. You can see from this like old style camera taking the picture, is quite clean, but it extends beyond the border, so may not be the best. Perhaps they recycled a poster and that's why, and now this is a skinny one. The next one is, to me, very cluttered. It's very pretty, nice colors, but there's all kinds of stuff going on, and you can't even tell what's going on. Your eyes is going from introduction to method. So what's wrong with that? It's just really busy, because then you got all these little tiny diagrams down the bottom here. I was just not entirely sure, and now you're squinting to look. You don't want people to squint to look at your poster. And I know, and you should be able to see the print quite well, even on your screen now. This one to me is just way too small. They too much reading because it's meant to be quick. So for me, this is too small. So just be careful, because that's too much information. In fact, you may have to drop it down. Your abstract will accept it that way, but doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. So that's what I was going to say about this one. We sent out a template for you to use for IPSSW, and I was just going to show you how you can manipulate certain things. So you go to design, and then slide size on the top. It shows you slides standard page setup. So this is where you can do your width and your height, and you may have to just change it. Mine's in centimeters, but I live in Canada. So you have to figure out what it is. 4 by 3 for me is pretty good, except that one time I had to do a quality improvement poster. They wanted a lot of information, it became really, really long. See, it's all costing money, so perhaps that's good. 4x3 is what I tend to go by. Then you can decide whether it's a portrait or landscape. And the other thing you do, this one is not bad. You can actually type away. Comparison, whoops, I'm not spelling right. Comparison of type A versus type B. I'm making up. And then you may have to adjust the size, and then your author list goes here. So this one, you can start typing where it says background, and you can say, this is a study to show whatever, and you can just make this even bigger. And if you want to make, you know how some posters have a bubble, you want to make a bubble. Some of you do know how to do this. You can highlight it and shape format. My thing is kind of a little bit slow. And then you can change the outline. I don't see it very well here. Where's the shape outline? The shape fill, you don't want to shape fill, but then you can do colors if you want, like a bit gray or something, and the outline can change this to be dark. And so now you have a box. And so you can fill things around. The other thing is if you want to just move it around, you can just move it around. And you see how I'm on the Mac here, so it actually gives you some grid lines. You can actually see how you're aligned with things. So that helps you. If you say, well, I don't have figure 1 and figure 2, you can just delete it. You don't have to create figure 2 if you don't have figure. I don't have any figures, that's fine. Then you may want to move this result section over to here and then make something bigger to fill the space. And sometimes it's nice to have white space, so you don't have much to say. Just leave it blank, but then everything just nicely spaced out. Logos is nice, so check with your hospital or institution what they want. So we've got the IPSSW logo here. So I'm at the Hospital for Sick Children, which is affiliated with University of Toronto. They want us to put both things in. They want us to do that. So just be careful. You don't want to have too many things going on either, but whatever is like highest priority, you get that space. See here it says acknowledgements. I just noticed up here. Would I do the acknowledgements here? I tend to do at the bottom and make a separate bubble from the references, just because I don't want to take away from the author list. And sometimes the poster or the abstract limitations, the 3 main authors, and then you do add all, just because it's a poster, it's not your paper, so it's supposed to be a snippet of your best work for this topic. So I think I will stop there. A very brief overview of how you do things. Mike, I'm going to let you do yours, and I think what I need to do is change presenter back to Mike. I can do that. I'm making you the presenter. You should have it pop up, and I'm going to mute.
Let's see, give me a second here. Okay, is my screen showing up okay?
Yep, you're all good.
Oh.
Okay, okay, cool. Okay, so I'm Mike Morrison, and also thanks Elaine. That was a really good intro to the approach to scientific posters, as they are at the moment. And then I'm probably going to tear a lot of what she said. I think it's all very good advice. I think especially the parts about the font size, especially the parts about decreasing the priority of your references and acknowledgements. And I think Elaine ended on probably a point I completely agree with, which is a poster is different from a paper, right? The traditional scientific poster is a paper on a poster, and you have to think about it much more like a poster. I had an experience with printing a poster where I was printing out one of my new style of posters, and the woman at the print shop just looked at it very strangely, and I was like, "What's up?" And she said, "It doesn't look like a scientific poster." I said, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, it looks like a poster. You know, most people come in here, they print actual posters. It's like, it's very like clean. There's a lot of empty space. It helps drill in one message, and then scientists just fill it all up with text." And so the radical thing that I'm about to suggest is to design posters more like posters and less like papers, which is exactly what Elaine just said. And the more you can do that, I think the better experience you'll have communicating. But I think really everything Elaine says still very much stands. I'm just gonna like probably take it to absurdity now. basically, this is the traditional approach on scientific posters, which is you try to cram your entire paper on the poster. And then you usually put your title at the top, followed by the author names. This is really like Elaine said, if you walk through a poster hall, most of them will look like this. And they've looked like this for 30 years, which really should be a red flag to you that like nothing in science should stagnate, right? Like stagnation is an insult to science. We've learned a lot about communication and learning and design. I mean, that was before the internet, these things were designed. And so none of that is reflected. If we are science, we should be continually improving our communication methods. So the fact that this has been stagnant either means that something else is driving it, keeping it stagnant, or that it was already at peak efficiency, which is probably unlikely. So like last year, I proposed this new simple layout that's a replacement to the wall of text. It's sort of a new default. It was sort of like killing the poster and starting over. So the idea here is that it looks more like a billboard. You have your main finding in the middle, translated in plain English, so when people walk by it, they can't really help but read it. It just punches the main finding into their head. And if you think about walking past 50 of these, it'd be really easy to get a lot. Or you can stop and you can skim a sidebar for like a minute. And if you want more detail, you can talk to the presenter, and the presenter has their own sidebar where they can present the things in. And then you can buff it up from here. So this is just sort of a default that I presented. And if they want even more, sometimes what people will do is they'll take pictures of the poster. So I've added a QR code here, which every phone can scan these, and it links to it can link to anything, your contact details, the full paper, everything. And the idea here is to give you something called progressive disclosure. You let the attendee choose how much information they want instead of being flooded. They can just walk by and get a 5 seconds worth of information. They can stop and skim for a minute, or they can stop and talk to you for 5 minutes. And if they want even more detail than that, they just scan the code, they get your whole paper, and they walk away and see other posters. So it really helps people choose their level of engagement. We called this the Better Poster, version 1. You can add key graphs and figures and images and things to the middle called the hero area. This is all based on something called user experience design. So user experience design is really different from, or UX for short. So user experience design is really different from graphic design, which is what most people think of when they think of design. So I can give you a quick lesson on how to apply graphic design to your posters, because most of what you've probably heard in your life in terms of design tips is probably graphic design. So here's some quick graphic design lessons. You want to make sure everything on your posters align with something else. This is probably the bane of your existence when you make posters. I've talked to people who've done studies on scientists making posters, and they find that like scientists spend on average 3 hours just aligning crap on their poster. But like this is probably, you're familiar with that need. The alignment just helps your eye move comfortably. The other thing you can do is you want to give the thing you want people to notice first the highest contrast. So generally, your eyeballs go to where the contrast is. So whatever you want people to notice first, you want to make that the highest contrast, not necessarily the brightest color, because if everything's a bright color, then the thing with the dullest color is actually the contrast thing. So think about it in terms of contrast. And then you can use a block test, which is basically you take a square and you move it all around your poster until everything looks even. I'm going to run that again like this. This is called a block test. And then what you end up with is something that's kind of attractive and it's cohesive and it all kind of hangs together. But in context, it still is as messy and hard to understand as all the other posters. It just looks a little bit more aesthetically usable, which isn't the same thing as user experience design. So user experience designer watches people use things all day and finds out where they're getting frustrated and then tries to smooth out those friction points so that people can get to their goals faster. And usually like it's for when you would use a website like Amazon and you notice that you can buy a product in one click, right? That's because there was a team of UX designers freaking out about your every interaction, making sure your pages load fast, make sure you can get through checkout fast, because there's money on the line, right? In science, we have something much more consequential than money on the line, but we don't have teams of UX designers optimizing our experiences, so they've just devolved into chaos. And so the idea is to start bringing some of these principles from UX design over into science. So probably the example of UX design that everybody's familiar with is ketchup bottles. So you know that here's a regular ketchup bottle, graphic design ketchup bottle, much, much prettier, still just as frustrating to use. The UX design ketchup bottle we all know and love, kind of ugly, but it gets the ketchup on the hot dog really smoothly, and for that reason, it's probably the one you buy. That's what UX design is about. It's about curing that frustration more than it is being aesthetic. and it only cares about aesthetics to the point that it helps with you using it. So here's a basic example of good UX design. This is just anticipating somebody getting confused and just pointing them in the right direction, right? You've all probably done things like this. This is printed in Microsoft Word in 5 minutes, still probably really help people. You've also played that game with your significant other or even family members where you try to like put a note where they're gonna notice it, like, oh, he's gonna get home and he's gonna grab the frosted mini wheats. I'm gonna put the note on the frosted mini wheats by a box. That kind of thinking you're doing about anticipating your user, that's what UX is all about. And at the high end, when you use apps like Uber, they've been ironed out to infinity, to where like you can order your first Uber in 2 clicks and with no reading a training manual or anything. That's really incredible UX. Really incredible UX is just invisible. The biggest example of UX we have in science is probably the abstract paragraph, which we all know and love. We don't really have another example of UX in science because science generally has pretty bad UX. You've all seen these kind of paths in the park. Instead of getting frustrated, these are called desire paths. And a UX designer looks at this and says, cool, now we know where to pave the next path. You really just have to sort of go with how people do behave. And some schools have started doing this, just paving where people walk. And it's kind of realistic. The key to understanding UX in poster sessions is something called information foraging theory, which I swear I'm gonna make funner than that sounds. But basically, we evolved to forage for information the way we used to forage for food in the wild, where we were just going through and like, you can think of posters like bushes or patches that contain like knowledge food, right? You're going to go up to the bushes that smell like they contain the most food, unless they're too thorny, and then you're going to skip those. And if a poster bush looks insightful, then you're going to forage for knowledge berries until your rate of return slows down, and then you're going to move to another bush. This applies to a lot of things. I've heard people use the example of dating sites, like you're swiping left and right, right? You know, like the profile's too long, or like, ooh, but they're really attractive. I'm going to spend a little more time. You're foraging for knowledge the same way you'd forage for food. So think about people using a poster session this way, and you can think about your user as this guy. I call this guy dummy. This is the sort of lazy inner idiot in all of us. Instead of designing for that impossibly smart person, try to design for just like the laziest possible person, because UX designers think about people processing information lazily as a matter of efficiency. It's very efficient to try to process information to get the maximum reward for the least effort. So you kind of go with that. So consider that your user is under time pressure in a poster session. He's got 55 minutes to browse 100 posters or so. He can't spend that much time in each one. He's already thinking about lots of other stuff, like all the other posters he saw, and where he's got to go after this poster session, and like how he like should have talked to that one person about that one thing. So he's already got a kind of a high cognitive load. And what that means is that it's really important for everything you design to minimize cognitive load. This is the Bible of user experience design. It's called "Don't Make Me Think," which can be offensive to some scientists. They're like, we want people to think. It's like, you want people to think about the details of your study, but you don't want them to have to think about like where you put stuff on your poster. You want that to be automatic so they can process the hard stuff. So really, there are a lot of ways to reduce cognitive load through design, but the easiest way is just to give dummy fewer things to process. So everything you add to your poster, dummy has to process it, and that increases his cognitive load. And everything you remove from a design, that is one less thing for him to have to think about, and it reduces his cognitive load. And the key here is that when you reduce that cognitive load, people think, well, they need to know everything. But really, like, if you only put one thing on your poster, then what's going to happen is he's going to read that one thing and spend the rest of his free load processing that one thing you tell him really deeply. And you want people to learn here. It's not really just about defending your work. It's about teaching people something that they can use in the future to accelerate your field. And the problem is, if you add too many things to a poster, then it's going to overload him. He's just going to freak out. And his brain, very helpfully, to reduce the load, is just going to chunk the entire thing into noise. So most scientific posters, like, which of these reminds you more of a scientific poster? Probably the one on the right. Most scientific posters are way over threshold. There's a threshold at which everything gets converted into noise, and it's much, much lower than you want. And what that means is most content on most posters is completely ignored. And research supports that traditional posters are almost completely ineffective at transferring knowledge, and that, again, most people just look for the conclusion in a sentence in the intro and ignore the rest, and then just ask the presenter to explain. So everything you put on your poster right now, it feels like you're being very comprehensive, but really, like, what you put on your poster is not the same thing as what people actually read. So a lot of it's wasted right now, even though it looks like a bunch of effort. And what happens is people will look at your poster if you put too much on it, and a couple bits will stand out, like maybe the title and like the key figure or something, and you're trying to sort of figure out what's on the poster based on these little bits that stand out. It's like almost like they're giving off a smell to you, and they kind of are. In information foraging theory, that's called information scent. So on scientific posters, the main thing giving off information scent is the title. And usually when you write your title, what you're doing is trying to create like an intentionally medium information scent. You like want people to stop. You don't want to give away too much. You want to like attract them and lure them into talking to you, kind of like you're writing clickbait, like, you know, like you wouldn't believe the secret to whatever. That's a medium information scent, which would be fine because it's giving off some, you know, information scent that it contains some knowledge for your user. But the problem is there's all these things he has to do to learn from it. He has to stop walking, talk to you, engage you in conversation, probably miss other posters, figure out how you laid out your poster, and all those things he has to do to get to that insight from your poster is called the interaction cost. And we want to minimize that interaction cost. So most scientific posters right now look like this. They're like a 5 to 10 minute interaction cost. If you stop at one, you're going to miss some others, and they have this weak information synth that doesn't teach you very much. And then all of that, when you're browsing a room full of these posters that are really overloading, it fatigues you. You get tired. You can't convert all that into noise. You can't process all that information, and you just get tired. And so a lot of people leave a poster session before they've even browsed most of the posters. And a lot of times you've missed over more than half of them in some sessions. And if you missed over half, like the odds of the most valuable poster in the room being the one that like in the half that you saw, I think are low. So we're really losing a lot of insight in science right now. And the reason scientific posters are designed this way is because scientific posters are designed this way. It's completely circular. Like there's a lot of conformity pressure in science. Nobody in science really gets design training. And I didn't either. Like when I started in science, I designed my posters just like the wall of text. And I was supposed to know better. You know, I came from software design, but I just assumed there was a good reason for it. And, you know, like, well, scientists are smart. There's probably a good reason for it, but there's really not. The reason is nobody. They're very, very smart people in science, but very few of us get that design training, and everybody assumes the same thing I assume, which is they assume there's a good reason, and there's just not. It's horrible design. And a lot of the things that, and because of that, what happens usually is scientists will blame themselves. You'll try to process this whole horrible design. You're like, and you'll just be like, wow, science is so hard, or I'm so stupid, when it has nothing to do with that. It's just a room full of interfaces designed by people who are very smart but have absolutely no design training. And so instead, I want you to think about this user context, like the person walking by your poster. This is like user context 1. He's going to walk by your poster in 5 seconds. So the UX design approach says, instead of getting frustrated and being like, well, you know, they need to spend 15 minutes reading my poster, we want to say like, well, 5 seconds is our constraint. Let's see how much we can teach him in 5 seconds. How much information can you get into Dummy's brain into 5 seconds? In 5 seconds. And really, if you think about it in terms of putting off a strong information scent, Dummy's goal, or like this, your user's goal, is to learn anything from this poster session. So the best thing you can do with your poster to put off a strong information scent is to teach him something, because information scent is about concordance with goals. If his goal is to learn, you want to teach him. So let's start by teaching him something in 5 seconds, see how much we can get in his brain. We start with our main finding here: negative affect inhibits attention in the workplace, which you're like, okay, I read that in 5 seconds, but I don't totally know what it means, right? You're having to sort of translate in your head. You're like, well, what does negative affect mean? You're like, okay, I guess that kind of means when you're in a bad mood at work, it distracts you, which is exactly what it means. So instead of trying to put the jargony stuff on the poster, just do the translation work for the user and put the translated version on the poster. The goal here is just to say it the way people are going to think it and save them the effort of translating to reduce that cognitive load so we can process it faster. So now it looks more like this, which is processed a lot faster, right? Now, that's about as many words as Dummy can read in 5 seconds, but we process images very quickly, so we can add a fast image to our poster. This can be a real image from your study. It can just be like a related graphic or something like that. And now it sucks you into that context, right? You're like, oh, I get it. She's in a bad mood. She's distracted. She's looking away from her monitor. The deal with adding, the reason you want to add images and text to your poster, and graphs if you can too, is something from cognitive psychology called elaboration. When you want to teach people something, you want to show it to them in multiple forms. If I tell you that bad moods distract you at work, and then I show you someone who's distracted at work, it triggers more of your like more connections in your mind, and it roots more deeply. And again, in cognitive psychology, this is called elaboration, and that's what you're trying to going for. So in 5 seconds, you're rooting it pretty deeply here. Now, this is about as many things as Dummy's brain can process in 5 seconds walking by, like a sentence and a fast image, right? But there's one more place where you can store data. Somebody on this call has guessed it already. And if you have guessed it, you're way ahead. But the one more place, if his brain is full, then the one place we can store a little bit more information is in his emotions. So usually in science, there's this allergy like, oh, it can't be emotional, you know, but really triggering emotion is scientific. If you want people to learn, if you want them to remember, you want to trigger as much emotion as you can. And like, even in the worst case, like, what if I offend somebody? If you offend somebody, they'll remember your finding for life. You know, that's actually, to me, like, that's great. In terms of scientific progress, if you help, whatever you have to do to help them remember what's important about your study, do it. This is, you know, what we do is life or death here. And so it's whatever we can do to help people remember. And the more likely case, the offensive case is very rare. I've never even seen an offensive poster because most scientists are so conservative, they go nowhere near that. The best case, though, is that it makes it much, much more fun to make your posters emotional, and people enjoy them more. People respond to them more. People give them more poster awards because everybody likes having a good experience. So one easy thing we could do to make this poster emotional is just use color to trigger emotion instead of just for your like branding colors or whatever, right? So red, easy, bad mood. You could take this even further, and you could choose a font that helps reinforce that bad mood, like a little spiky font or something. But now you're triggering emotions and the words and the images. You're kind of rooting that one thing really deeply, even though it's just one thing. So next, we want to do the most fun rule of all. So the next UX design rule I have for you is called surprise and delight. So the idea with surprise and delight is that you want to make everything you design unexpectedly rewarding in some way, because you want to keep that novelty up. You want to keep people laughing if you can through a poster session. Poster sessions are so boring right now. People bail on them. If we could make them fun in the future and make people actually enjoy going to them, make them a draw of the conference, one of those things we could do is make them just kind of like tongue-in-cheek funny or just genuinely funny, and that'll get us more memory and learning too. So I'm not very good at this. Comedy is like the bleeding edge of science translation. It's very hard. But one thing I thought was just make her a little bit more pissed off. I've seen also people do, like, this is one of my favorites. This is an early better poster. As you can see in the top left, he's like his study is about searching for antibiotics in deep sea sponges, and he's got a little SpongeBob on there, and SpongeBob is searching. So it's not a gimmick. It's not just a cat picture. It's completely relevant to what he's saying, and it helps you remember it. It's like, oh, SpongeBob's searching for bacteria in sea sponges. So these little elements like this can really help just make people giggle a little bit and like help them remember it. I've also seen people who study like pathogens turn their bullet points into little pathogens. I mean, just little things like that that make you laugh, do them. Like, just, you're human. We're all human browsing your poster. Let's just acknowledge that and stop being over professional, because no one's professional at home. Everybody learns unprofessionally. So now we have this. This is already, to me, communicating much more than most scientific posters, but now that's our first user context, is the walk by. Our second user context is what happens when Dummy stops. So when Dummy stops to talk, what most people think is he's going to stop, he's going to diligently read all your poster while you're standing there, you know, and awkwardly just ignore you and read every text on your poster, but really almost nothing gets read. And you can see in this picture, where are they looking? They're looking at her, right? Because when you're stopped at somebody's poster, you're having a social interaction. So that social presence is consuming most of your resources. And this is one example of people, you know, looking at the presenter and not completely ignoring the poster. What I've done, just because I'm lame and weird, is I've taken overhead shots of poster sessions and done the same thing. Almost no one is looking at posters. Everyone is looking at the presenters. And so really getting people to look at anything on your poster after they stop is really hard. But there are a couple things you can try. You can try the better poster thing, and you can have a sidebar that's away from your body so that they feel more comfortable. People have called this sidebar on the left the introvert bar, because it's far enough away from your personal bubble that people will stop and skim it for a second before talking to you. And the more information you get into people's brains before they stop and talk, the better and deeper questions they ask you and the better conversations they have. They don't ask you like, so tell me about your poster. They ask you very specific questions because you've already taught them things. So that's one thing you can try. But what I found with a lot of better poster presenters is they don't end up needing the cheat sheet, which I expected. It's just kind of a crutch. And so you can actually drop a lot of your detail because you won't end up using it, and try something like this, where you have a big key figure, like your most important figure in the middle, your takeaway for the 5-second layer at the top, and then still a sidebar for them to skim. Or if you can take it one more step and you can sort of have, I call this kind of like a party on the left, business on the right. On the left, you have your quick 5-second layer to teach them very quickly something. And on the right, you have a few key figures. And at the top, instead of titles, you have punchlines. So at this top left one, if you can see my cursor, it's not like this graph shows cognitive loads relationship with mental imagery. It says imagining the text as pictures was better than just reading. Like, it gives you that takeaway because, again, dummy's at a high cognitive load. You want to help him process things as he's kind of glancing at your poster while he's talking to you. And the more you can help him process, the more you're going to teach him, the more he's going to learn. So I know a lot of this is very like heretical. I will say that universally the feedback to trying designs like these has been overwhelmingly positive. I've seen people win a lot of poster awards. I strongly suspect that there's an advantage there. I've been in rooms where like the better poster is the one design more like this is the only one that wins, because everybody likes being communicated to. The first ever design like this to be used in a scientific conference won best poster in the whole show. People say they get more conversations and better conversations. We're still studying it, but so far, so very, very good. And it's really because I'm not suggesting anything really that crazy. All I'm really saying is don't put content in your poster that people ignore, and that people ignore most content. If you follow these 2 rules, you will create amazing posters however you follow them. But it takes a long time to get good at these. I'm very minimalist with my posters, as you've seen. People still ignore 10% of my posters. So it really, like, that threshold's so low, and people are saying you get so uncomfortable as a poster creator hitting that, but really you can push it as far as you want. I think one of my favorite posters ever is this one on the bottom right, which is really just a good data visualization. You're going to be, remember, you're standing right there to answer any detailed questions. So it's really just about what you put in their brain before they stop. And that's better for learning. I think it's better for your poster to teach people one thing really well than it is to put 1,000 things on there that they don't pay attention to. But there's one final advantage to the wall of text, like on the left. And the advantage is it feels more dense. And we're used to in science things feeling dense being good. Like, because we're ultimately kind of like, even the smartest scientists you know is still dumb in some ways. And one of those ways that even the smartest scientists are dumb is that we confuse density, like reading difficulty, with scientific rigor, right? There's actually been studies on this where they show that just artificially making something harder to read makes scientists trust it more. They're like, oh yeah, that's good science. I must be stupid, right? It's like you did nothing good. You actively obfuscated the communication, and so you really want to be aware of that bias and learn to separate for yourself, like, that overall feel of a poster from how much it's actually communicating to you. Because like the one on the right is actually communicating things. Some of you are probably reading these findings, reading those punchlines as I'm talking. The one on the left, I don't think you could tell me anything about. It's really not communicating anything, but it does feel dense. And so you have to sort of separate that feeling of density and of difficulty and effort from what you're actually learning. And I think once that's something people are already starting to do in science with these better posters. They're starting to realize they're much clearer, much better for learning. And so that's kind of where we're going. So that's a summary of all the basic principles of UX design applied to posters. And now, with the time remaining, I'm going to go through Elaine's poster, which she was very, very brave and very, very kind to donate. And we're going to go through that and see if we can improve it a little bit with these posters. So I've got, let me switch present again here. Let's see. I've got Elaine's post. Okay, well, it didn't work very well. We're going to do this. So I've got Elaine's poster here, I think. And this is what one of Elaine's example posters, which she gave me full permission to tear apart. Very, very brave of you again, Elaine. This is what it looks like blowing by. And you probably noticed that you didn't get anything from it. That's about the speed you'd walk past it. So we're going to try to improve it from now. And Elaine, I might ask you some questions for this, because one of the hardest things about doing this is it's hard to translate research from other people's fields. I'm not in pediatrics, I'm an organizational psychologist. So It's hard for me to know what's important on your poster, the same way that everybody listening is going to view it. I can just help you prioritize the things that are important. So I'm going to bring over Elaine's poster here. Let's see. This is going to be in PowerPoint. All right, so let's start here. Now I'm going to give you some freebies. So in science, author names are very, very sacred, right? Like credit is the currency of science. In learning, they're completely irrelevant. Like when you're trying to learn what this study is about and what they found and what you can take away and use in your own life, the author names in the department matter. It does not matter at all. So we're just going to kill those for now. We'll bring them back later. Same deal with the logos. It really is, it's useful. I know a lot of people require you to put logos on your poster, like your granting agencies. You want to, promote your affiliations and things, and you want to help brand yourself. So we're going to bring them back. But for now, again, they're completely irrelevant to learning what this study is about. So we're going to kill those. And that's going to buy us some space. So we're going to boost this up a little bit. We're going to left align it because left align is faster to process than center alignment. Even though center alignment, it feels pretty, it feels symmetrical, but left align's faster to process because your eye doesn't have to find the start of each line. So Elaine, if you could chime in here and tell me what the main thing you learned was from the study in a sentence.
Isn't it all there?
What would be your one big takeaway?
One big takeaway is that it's good to teach it. Nurses, perioperative nurses require critical event updates, and it's actually a mutual benefit for the presenters and facilitators as well as the nurses.
Like that?
Something like that.
Okay. Well, I think so this to me, like that was a really good summary. I think which to me it seems common that like Elaine just crushed it, just saying it to me in a casual setting. And if you notice, I wrote it exactly as Elaine said it out loud. So we use different words when we write than when we speak out loud. But if you use conversational language, a magic thing happens. One, people interpret it faster. Two, it triggers a sense of social presence. It's almost like the poster's talking to you, which is better for learning. So the other parts of the study this poster that I really like, the hardest part about these example posters is that there's a lot of good things in this poster. Elaine has done a lot of things right that a lot of people don't do. And there's always good, very, very good things about every poster. And so what I'm going to try to do is just kind of bring those things out. So we're going to start with this one. And so I'm going to start with just this key takeaway, right? Really, I'm going to show you an example here. The way that posters are ordered, and this is a very good one. But let's see if I can. So if you think about this template that you saw, right? Usually what you think about when you think about reading order is people are going to go here, right? They're like, okay, here's the title, like you're reading a paper. Here's the title, now I'm going to read the background, I'm going to read the methods, now I'm going to read this figure, then the secondary figure, and then I will say that all leads to the results and the conclusions, which would have taken me 10 to 15 minutes to get here, but this is reading like a paper. This is the way that you design posters to be processed typically in science. But really, according to eye tracking research and usability research, it's more like this. So you want to follow this advice. Oh, sorry about that. On the web, you want to start with need to know and then end with nice to know versus following a narrative. Narratives can help you, but you really want to trigger that need to know fast. So we're going to lay these red dots on the order that people process that want the information typically in terms of need to know, nice to know. And so that's probably, let's put these back on. Background, goals, objections, like this. And then usually people want to know the main finding first, then a little bit more detail about the results. And they want to see a graph that really like sort of shows them that data behind what you're saying to help them trust it. And then they want to know who cares, right? They want to know like why is what you're saying important, right? That's over here. And then they want to know, well, how did you find all that? And then everything else past that, they're probably going to ask you. Like at this point, just learning that took them long enough. You're standing right there, they're going to ask you, so they don't even do anything else. So if you look at the overlap on these things, you can see what's positioned well. So like probably the best part of this design is right here, this key figure right in the middle, right? Because there's a really close relationship between the order that people are going to look at it and where it is in the visual hierarchy. But the rest of this is almost backwards, right? Which is what we see in a lot of traditional posters. So we're going to try to apply this to Elaine's in the 13 minutes we have left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to take our main finding, our number 1, right? I'm going to put that here. And then I really liked, remember the thing about like triggering that elaboration, you want to orient people with imagery. So this is a great image Elaine has. We're going to put that here. And what I'm thinking with this one, with this image, is what I'm trying to do is just make it really big, but also make it look intentional. So if I just do this, right, it just kind of looks like slapped on there, which is fine. It's better than where we were before. But if you put it to if I crop it a little bit, and if you're new to PowerPoint, you can right click on an image and the crop is right there, I believe. Ooh, I was wrong. It's under picture format right here. So I'm gonna go picture format, and then I can't see it next to my GoToWebinar, but I'm going to crop like there. And then you get these little crop things, and you can just crop it kind of nicely like that. So just the detail is left. And then I'm going to shove that right to the edge. That way it kind of looks like everything's continuing off the frame, right? Like the story is still going. Make it a little bigger. Great image. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a block over here. So the idea behind negative space in design, people say like, oh, it's too much emptiness, right? But really what negative space does is it's very functional. There's a reason why beginner designers usually fill up all the space, and more experienced designers, I'm in the middle, by the way, I'm not super expert, but the reason more experienced designers use a lot of negative space is because it helps you orient very quickly. It helps you find signal in the noise. So the more you crowd your finding, the harder it is to read. So I'm going to put something behind it like this and give it some high contrast. So I'll make this white. Now, what I'm going to do with the colors here, the ideal thing would be to find some colors to make this emotional. And I think, Elaine, you could probably figure out better than me, like the emotions behind this, what emotions this should trigger based on how these are viewed in your field. If you can't think of it, go ahead.
Blue is good.
Blue's good. Okay, I was gonna actually change. But blue is like it's a common medical color. It's like trustworthy and things like that.
Sure.
Gotcha. What I was gonna try to do is show you something called the eyedropper. So if you haven't used the eyedropper before, it's your very best friend. If you can't think of an emotion, and I'm gonna go ahead and just do it with this one, even though blue might be a good emotion for this. I'm gonna click it and I'm gonna pick a color from the image. I was going to. It's the outline, sorry. And I'm gonna pick a color from the image and it's just gonna repeat it. And now this looks cohesive. Again, it looks more like continuous, right? And we don't need an outline, so I'm gonna turn the outline off. And so now it looks like the image and this thing are kind of going together, right? And I'll continue it most of the way down. Okay, all the way down for now. And so right now your eye goes straight to this, right? It's the only thing on the poster. It's the thing you're reading. You can make this as big as possible. And then font-wise, I'll show you that in a minute. Actually, we'll leave this for now. This is really, what I'm gonna do now is play something I call like the emphasizing game. Basically, if you could try to read this paragraph looking at only the emphasized parts, what would you wanna emphasize if you could still get a complete picture? And I'm just gonna emphasize, I think perioperative operative nurses require critical event updates. And that's the primary, that's the first part. And then the second most important is that it mutually benefits both. So I'm gonna actually use that eyedropper again, and I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna grab this yellow, like that. And now it looks a little bit more cohesive. And so now when people are walking by, they can read this really quickly. But I'm gonna grab my second favorite parts of Elaine's poster, and that's these two graphs. So these are really great graphs, and they're really cool. They show what she was talking about how like it's very engaging for participants, and how it does increase knowledge and skills. So I'm gonna put those on the poster because those are kind of like the second most important things. Let's see. And the cool thing about using these layouts is that now we have all this room. We don't have to cram it with text because we can depend on them basically reading nothing. So we really want to emphasize our visuals. So now we have space to make these much, much bigger. And make them probably about that size and line up their sizes for that alignment rule. And at the top of these graphs, is remember, if you can picture someone standing, you can see my cursor over here on the right. So you're going to be standing talking to that person over there on the right, and you're going to be kind of dumbly glancing at these while they're talking. So we want to put our punchlines on top. So I'm gonna put one here, and I'm gonna say critical event updates increased both knowledge and skill, and sorry, can't type fast. I think it's, Lane, it was a knowledge of, it's a Laren, sorry about this.
Just say skills. It's okay, just leave it.
Okay, cool.
Oh,
Is that right?
sure, it's okay.
Okay, okay, cool. So I'm gonna do this and do that punchline, let's see. Like that, and I think this one, the point about this was, the second graph was that it was very an engaging exercise. Say something like this. I'm gonna misspell things. All right. Okay. And then play the bold game again. Increase both knowledge and skill. So if they were skimming real quick, they could get that. Engaging. Players and participants both felt the exercise was highly engaging. Sorry for my spelling. Like that. So again, when you're skimming, this is more of an art than a science at that point, but like you can decide what to bold, but the idea is to give them, make it very skimmable. And now I'm going to add back some of those credits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that first thing, and we're going to have, if you think of how movie posters are, so if you look at, this may go horribly for me or it may not, I'm going to go to Google Images, I'm going to say movie posters. And you can see what they do is they'll put the credits down here on the right, right? They don't want to clutter this emotion and this point and this purpose of the top part of the poster. They want to put it like just down in the bottom in a consistent location, with the exception of this one that has the credits at the top, which you could do. But there, like when you see the stars names at the top, that's part of the draw, right? Like you're going to see this partially for them. Usually. And so, but the majority of the credits are all down here, which is what we're going to kind of copy. And if you notice also, they use a condensed font, it's a squished up font so they can fit everything. It's going to take a second to load, but if you can find one of those, if you need more space, you can do it. So we're going to do that in the 5 minutes we have left. I'm going to take this and University of Toronto and put it down there. I'm going to have a bar at the bottom, just like a movie poster, like that. And then I'm going to want to make it look separate from the rest of this content on the poster. So I'm going to put a bar behind it and send it to back, and like this, kill the outline. Now your eyes should go, when you're walking by this, we can probably make this a little bit bigger. You're walking by and you're like, boom, perioperative nurses require critical event updates, and it mutually benefits the facilitators and nurses who provide them. And then I think on my original draft of this, here's my original, you can get a couple more. These are not points from Elaine's poster. Elaine, I made these up, but if you had more takeaways for how to design, like the methods of how to design a good simulation, you could put them here. So people walk past and they get these like really quick updates, increase knowledge and skill, train everybody together, like you're learning something in 5 seconds there. And then you have the detail for when people stop right here. And then lastly, you have the things that aren't really teaching you anything, but it's good if you want to know who did this study or things like that, you know where to find it. It's in the credits bar. So something more like this is a poster more designed, I think, for how posters are used and for not wasting any content. The big exception to all of this is you want to think about how long people spend at posters in your sessions. If you have a poster session where you're not standing by it and your poster, and there's 3 posters in the room and people have an hour to browse 3 posters with no presenter, do it the other way. You want to design it because then it's more like a paper. But if you're in a room full of lots of posters and you're standing right there to explain everything, then something like this is going to communicate more and teach people more and help them enjoy it more and get fatigued less than the traditional design, I think. and so far so good on doing that. And that's it. Elaine, thank you very much. Example posters are the hardest thing to come by, but they make everything so helpful. And usually I beat up on my posters, so because my first ones were all text. But so that's basically it for now. And I guess any questions I can answer. This is all just a version 1.2, I will say. This is I'm still learning. We really should have posters should improve. If you browse poster sessions and they all look the same in 10 years, we've all failed. We should be always learning about how to communicate faster and better because it's science and what we do is so important. Go ahead, and that's it.
Thanks, Mike. This was great. Super informative to go through it and actually watch you take pieces and put it together to create something new. Elaine, and look, you have a new poster to use.
And he was so nice about it.
So
I get so nervous. I'm sorry. I don't. It's like everybody does a pretty good job with posters. I feel so bad.
So in the world of simulation, we talk a lot about direct feedback. He gave me a ton of direct feedback versus any of this advocacy inquiry or plus delta. What do you think went well? What's not so good? He just kind of told me what to do. We can talk about the debriefing.
I hope it was right.
Feedback.
Great.
Anyways, Caitlin, I'll let you finish up with the question.
Yeah, no problem. So, one question came in, Mike, and I think you mentioned this briefly, but the question was, has anyone done any research on eye tracking with posters?
Yes, great question. So the biggest trouble with researching posters is that people use posters in a poster session, like a live one, very differently than the lab. There's a lot more pressure, but there have been lab studies that done eye tracking with posters, and it's kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, where even in the lab, people will just skip to the conclusion, go to the intro, barely touch the methods, and then move on. And because it's a lot of information to take in. And again, the way you process a poster when someone's standing right there and you feel awkward is different from how you process it when you're reading it like a paper when you have time. So there has been a couple, and the couple that have been done have shown that people spend most of their time on the conclusions and the intro and kind of skip over methods, and that most of it's ignored. But we're looking into that ourselves. So we're working on a grant right now to do two things: eye tracking and behavior tracking. But it's really hard to get permission to do that in big conferences. Nobody wants you. And when you give somebody an eye tracker, they behave differently. So it's hard. But yeah, the few that have been done are kind of what I was talking about.
Great. That was the only question that came in. Elaine, did you have any other questions for Mike?
I put them all on a chat box, but I can ask them myself.
Okay,
sorry. Thank you.
I was thinking, like, what percentage of posters are of the simplified, cleaner version at some of the recent conferences that you attended?
It honestly, it depends on the type of the zeitgeist of the conference, I guess. So at most conferences, you can probably figure on maybe 1 to 5% better posters. But like that's, to me, that's purebred. That's like using the exact first layout I prescribed, right? In terms of the number of posters that have been influenced by it, it's really hard to track. A lot of people I walk by are like, oh yeah, I cut the text on my poster down a little bit after seeing your video or whatever. And some people have added like the main takeaway box and things like that. So influenced is more like I would think somewhere around 8-10%. It was the video, really, most people have seen it. I think most people in science, and so it influenced them a little bit. But yeah, we're so far on 1 to 5. At a teaching conference where people are really enthusiastic about teaching and learning, the number is much higher, which to me is kind of indicative. But
it's very cool. It's very cool. So I was going to follow with the other question was, does a hybrid form of a poster format work? Just to say, I'm just not that brave to be out there. Because everybody's like that, and actually, as an aside, at IPSSW, we're not saying do this. We want people to consider some of these very salient points. I mean, it's the same thing as I said. Be concise. Think about what you want to say. Just that we've never been this brave to put it this way. We're very married to the traditional one. So, anyways, a hybrid format, like if or should be all or none.
Oh, anything, right? So if you think about the information sent, right, and really all that means is teach people as they walk by, teach people fast. The simplest thing you can do to improve your poster is to move your credits to the bottom and replace your title with a takeaway. That's it. Change, put the rest of the text on there, put everything else you want on there. You just want to replace that, like just take this main thing like this. If you can still see my screen, can you still see my screen? And just replace it with like that. Like just make your, instead of a title, because a title doesn't teach anything. A title tells you what you're gonna teach them. So replace that space you use for your title with a takeaway, something that teaches people something. That's the simplest thing you can do. And that's still something. But hybrid,
Okay.
anything, yeah. And I would ask one question on that, one follow-up question. What marries you to the traditional design?
Well, we're just very traditional. This is kind of what expected. You have to have all these other sections. When you submit an abstract, you kind of need to say that. We judge a lot on the methodology and the results. So when we judge to say, does this abstract even qualify to be presented? We look a lot. People want to know, how did you get there? Not so much your message. Like, do you have good stats? Do you have any of that kind of stuff? So it's not always a conclusion. Like, yeah, sure, I tend to go to conclusion, as you said, but I do want to know, how do they do it? But I get what you say. It's information sent. You want to draw people in. If it's not even an interesting thing, oh, what, nurses?
Oh.
I don't work with nurses. I don't do that. I do like ward. I do nursing home. So they doesn't even catch them. So I guess it makes sense.
It doesn't
We
mean you
measure
can't do
it.
methods. That is one of the common objections, right? You want to, and I think, so if you think about it in terms of like people want to see the methods, that's very true. And there's two things there. There's people want to see the methods when you submit it and they're reading your poster on their screen versus when they're walking by, right? So the real question is, do people want to learn the methods by asking you to explain your methods in person, or by waiting on you to stand there awkwardly while they read the methods off your poster? So they want the methods, but where are they going to get them from is one thing to think about. The other thing you can think about is, here's some of these are weird prototype posters that may enrage some of you. But so if you think about like this poster, right, where I have the methods here, can you still see my screen?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. So here you have, this poster emphasizes the methods, right? You still have your main takeaway on the left, and then you have like just straight methods spelled out, right? This is something you could read standing at a distance from it, just pausing really quickly. So really, you can use these things to emphasize what you want to emphasize. You don't have to emphasize conclusions. And especially in more like in fields like genetics, where every study is a custom method, methods needs to have a much more central focus. So you can determine where that needs to be, but I think consolidating methods, one thing I've seen people do is use flowcharts for methods, which can be really, really helpful. I'm not at all saying take your methods off the poster, and the only reason I didn't do methods on your example poster here is because we just didn't have time. Like I would probably do something here, maybe this band right here, you could put a whole band of steps right here for making a good intervention, where you spell out the methods right there. And I would probably do something like that. So it really is a game of how many things can you get in people's brain before they start ignoring everything. My record is like 5 things. And so it's very hard to get everything in. And because you can't get everything in, you have to figure that some stuff you're just gonna have to explain out loud. But it's a different thing if they're taking the poster home or they're reading it online, then it needs to have more on it.
And that's why you put the QR code on as well.
Yes, which isn't shown here, but exactly.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, well, I think that's it. Yep, I think we are good to close. Thank you guys so much for presenting this. We are going to make sure it's on the website for IPSS members to access after the fact, and we'll continue to promote this as we get closer to our rescheduled IPSSW 20 that's happening in October. So with that, thank you guys so much, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, guys. See ya.